Kale was not supposed to be standing in the orbital receiving bay of the Virelian Empire, but then again, Kale was not supposed to do a lot of things he did on a regular basis, like bypassing 3 levels of security just to fix a docking clamp with a spoon because the proper tools had been ritually reassigned to ceremonial storage by someone who clearly had never repaired anything in their life. The bay itself floated in synchronized silence above the violet storm bands of the gas giant below, its surface constantly shifting like a sleeping animal that occasionally remembered it was made of politics. Every few seconds, the entire structure adjusted its orientation by a fraction of a degree, as if unsure whether it wanted to impress visitors or gently intimidate them into confessing their secrets. Kale was crouched inside an open maintenance hatch, one hand buried in a cluster of glowing cables, the other holding what could generously be called a diagnostic wand, but functionally resembled a toothbrush that had gone through a very ambitious career change. He was humming something that might have been a song or just the sound of his own patience running out. Behind him, a ceremonial guard robot cleared its throat politely. Kale didn't look up. "If you're about to tell me I'm not authorized to be here, you're about 6 minutes late. I am required to inform you," the robot said, "that you are not authorized to be here." "Yeah, noted," the robot paused. Its logic core briefly considered existential dread, then it continued, "You are also required to cease touching the Imperial docking interface." Kale adjusted a cable. A soft spark flickered, followed by a distant chime that sounded suspiciously like something approving him. "I'd love to, but your docking interface is crying in 3 different dialects, and one of them is asking for emotional support." The robot made a sound like it was buffering disappointment. Before it could escalate the situation into something official, the entire bay shifted. Not physically, more like reality remembered it had an audience. Every light synchronized, every holographic panel stabilized, and the air itself felt like it had been pressed flat and ironed into ceremony. Kale sighed. "Oh good, that's either a royal arrival or the ventilation system finally giving up." It was the former. The alien Princess Lysera stepped into view at the far end of the bay, and even the robots stopped pretending they didn't notice her. She moved with the kind of confidence that suggested gravity was something she negotiated with rather than obeyed. Her long ears caught the ambient glow of the bay's systems, reflecting faint pulses of light like they were tuned to frequencies no one else had access to. She didn't look around as she entered. She simply assumed everything was already aware of her presence and adjusting accordingly, which, unfortunately for everyone else, it usually was. Kale finally looked up from the hatch. "You're early for whatever this is." Lysera's gaze landed on him as if he were a misfiled document that had somehow learned to speak. "And you are late for being removed. That sounds like a scheduling issue." A ripple moved through the assembled court attendants behind her, an entire entourage of diplomats, analysts, and ceremonial observers whose job was mostly to look like they understood what was happening even when reality clearly didn't. Lysera raised one hand slightly. The room quieted instantly. "I am Lysera of Virelian," she said. Her voice carried the subtle harmonic layering of imperial broadcast augmentation, meaning it sounded like she was speaking and also like 3 background narrators agreed with her. "Daughter of the Continuum Throne, heir to the algorithm crown, and bearer of the First Vow Protocol." Kale nodded slowly. "That last one sounds expensive." "It is binding," she said, "even worse." There was a pause where the entire empire seemed to lean forward, waiting for Kale to realize he was supposed to be intimidated. Kale instead checked the cable in his hand, shrugged, and reconnected it. The bay lights stabilized further. Lysera's ears tilted slightly. A subtle shift, but among her kind it was equivalent to narrowing one's eyes and sharpening a blade. "You are Kale," she said, as if confirming a malfunction. "That's what the tag says," he replied, tapping the faded identification patch on his suit. It flickered weakly. "It's not super confident about it, but we're working through things. You are a human engineer assigned to peripheral maintenance." "I prefer galactic emotional support technician, but sure." A faint sound, almost laughter, escaped one of the attendants before it was immediately swallowed by protocol correction. Lysera stepped closer. The air around her adjusted, subtly increasing in elegance per cubic meter. "You have been selected." Kale blinked. "For what?" "Because I'm currently winning against this very stubborn piece of machinery." "The imperial trial of strength and strategy," she said. He stared at her. "That sounds like a thing people say right before a very bad afternoon. It is a sanctioned contest to determine compatibility of rule-bound succession vows." Kale slowly set down his tool. "I'm going to be honest with you, half those words feel like they shouldn't be in the same sentence." Lysera studied him for a long moment. Humans were rare in this sector, rarer still in Imperial docking bays, and rarer still behaving like the concept of consequences was more of a suggestion than a rule. You will compete, she said. Do I get hazard pay? You will compete, she repeated, slightly slower, as if the universe itself needed to understand the syllables. Kale leaned back against the hatch rim. And if I say no? The entire bay lights dimmed by a fraction, as if reality itself was preparing a polite warning label. Lysera tilted her head. Her long ears caught a faint stream of incoming data, probability forecasts, social expectation matrices, ritual compliance models. All of them agreed on one thing: Kale should already be afraid. Instead, he looked mildly inconvenienced. If you refuse, she said carefully, you will be considered in violation of Imperial ceremonial continuity. Is that bad? A diplomat behind her whispered something into a translator orb. The orb short-circuited. Lysera continued, it is socially discouraged. Kale nodded. Okay, but what if I win? That question landed differently. Not loudly, but precisely. Like a tool placed on a table that no one expected to be sharp. Lysera hesitated for exactly 1/2 second. For her kind, that was equivalent to a public confession of instability. Then she said it. Then I will belong to you. The bay did not react immediately. It took a moment for all connected systems, observers, and distributed consciousness nodes to process the statement. Somewhere an AI etiquette engine attempted to generate appropriate applause and instead produced a recipe for soup. Kale stared at her. Belong like a subscription, like a vow, she corrected. Oh, he said, those are worse. A few attendants made choking sounds. One of them fainted gracefully, which was considered a respectable collapse in Virelian court culture. Kale scratched his head. You know, I was just here to fix a clamp. You have been chosen because you are statistically negligible in influence metrics, Lysera said. This ensures fairness. That feels like an insult dressed up in math. It is tradition. Kale looked back into the maintenance hatch, then at the glowing empire hovering above a gas giant, then at the princess who looked like she had never once lost an argument and was deeply curious about what it felt like. He sighed. All right, he said, but if I'm doing this, I want it in writing, and maybe snacks. Trials usually come with snacks. Lysera blinked. Snacks? Yeah, you people always do dramatic, life-altering events with no snacks. It's a design flaw. For the first time, something almost like confusion crossed her composed expression. Her long ears shifted slightly, as if trying to recalibrate the concept. I will authorize nutrient provisions, she said slowly. Great, Kale said, then I guess I'm in your weird space competition thing. The entire bay seemed to inhale. Lysera turned slightly toward the assembly, her voice regaining its imperial resonance. Prepare the trial. Kale added casually, and if I die, I want it noted that I objected to the lack of snacks. No one laughed, but somewhere in the system logs of the Imperial Court AI, a new entry appeared, unknown variable introduced, humor. Outcome prediction unstable. The first stage of the trial was not a stage in the traditional sense, because the Virelian Empire considered traditional things to be emotionally inefficient, and had replaced most of them with dynamically reconfiguring architecture that occasionally forgot what it was supposed to be mid-existence. Kale stood on a platform that was currently pretending to be solid ground, but had the unsettling habit of briefly remembering it was actually a simulation layer projected over a gravitational null field. Every few seconds his boots would slightly disagree with physics and then apologize by reattaching him to reality. Just so I understand, he said, glancing at the shifting horizon, this whole thing is going to try to kill me, right? Lysera stood beside him, hands folded, long ears catching the ambient telemetry of the arena like they were listening to a private symphony of probability. Not kill, she said. Eliminate unsatisfactory outcomes. That's worse. That's like being fired by the universe. A faint flicker crossed her expression, something that might have been irritation or mild curiosity at his continued existence. Behind them, the Imperial audience floated in suspended observation pods, each one tuned to a different emotional frequency, so no one had to experience the same reality in the same way. One pod was clearly set to dramatic awe, another to clinical disinterest, and at least one appeared to be stuck on slightly hungry confusion. A voice echoed through the arena, smooth and artificially dignified. Begin trial segment 1, gravitational integrity chamber. Kale looked down, the ground vanished. For a fraction of a second he was weightless, suspended between decisions the universe hadn't finished making yet. Then gravity reasserted itself in a new direction, and he slammed sideways into what used to be a wall and was now a ceiling. Oh good, he muttered, hanging there. We're doing creative physics. Lysera remained perfectly upright, standing on a shifting axis that reoriented itself around her presence like it was trying to impress her. Maintain equilibrium, she said calmly. I'm maintaining several emotions right now, does that count? A cluster of metallic shapes emerged from the shifting geometry, drone constructs designed like elegant geometric predators, each one folding and unfolding in dimensions that technically didn't exist yet but were already annoyed to be used this way. One of them emitted a polite chime. Kale squinted. Is that thing greeting me? It is calibrating your termination threshold, Lysera said. Oh, friendly, the drones moved. Kale reacted the only way he ever had. By treating imminent danger like it was a broken appliance. He reached into his belt, pulled out a diagnostic emitter and flicked it on. Nothing happened. He stared at it. You had one job. The emitter buzzed weakly as if offended by the accusation. One of the drones lunged. Kale stepped aside on instinct, except aside was currently downward relative to an argument between two gravitational fields, so instead of evading, he briefly became a suggestion in motion. He collided with a floating calibration node, grabbed it, and accidentally tore it free. The arena paused. Even the drones hesitated as if unsure whether this counted as part of the rules. Kale blinked at the node in his hand. It was glowing softly and displaying error messages in at least 4 languages and 1 emotional state. Is this important? He asked. Lysera's eyes narrowed slightly. Her ears shifted in a way that indicated the imperial equivalent of this should not be possible. That is a gravitational anchor regulator, she said. Cool, Kale replied. It's now emotionally attached to me. The arena shuddered. The drones recalculated, then very politely they attempted to kill him with increased urgency. Kale ran, except running was complicated because the floor kept deciding whether it was horizontal, vertical, or spiritually uncertain. He bounced off a wall, landed on what felt like the ceiling, then slid across it like physics had briefly given up and delegated responsibility to gravity interns. Lysera watched him. She had expected improvisation. She had expected struggle. She had even accounted for failure modes involving panic, arrogance, or instinctive submission. What she had not accounted for was Kale treating the entire system like it was slightly annoying furniture. He ducked under a drone beam, rolled, and accidentally triggered a maintenance hatch. The hatch opened. Inside was a manual override lever labeled in ceremonial script, "Do not touch unless you are a very confident problem." Kale stared at it. Well, he said, that's practically begging. Lysera's voice cut through the chaos. Do not activate that. Kale paused. That sounded like a suggestion. It is a command. That's worse, he said and pulled the lever. The arena stopped, not in a dramatic explosion or collapse, but in a sudden, deeply offended stillness, like reality had just been interrupted mid-sentence. Gravity froze, the drones froze. Even Lysera froze, though her expression remained perfectly composed, as if she had simply decided that motion was beneath her dignity for the moment. A system voice spoke again, now slightly less confident. Segment interruption detected, reevaluating structural authority. Kale leaned against the frozen air. It was surprisingly firm. Did I break something? Lysera did not respond immediately. Her long ears flickered, processing streams of emergency diagnostics cascading through imperial infrastructure. For the first time, she looked less like someone observing a trial and more like someone realizing the trial had started observing her back. You accessed a restricted control node, she said finally. Yeah, it was labeled like it wanted me to. That is irrelevant. That's exactly the kind of labeling problem I'm talking about. The drones slowly reactivated, but with noticeable hesitation, like they were unsure whether continuing was socially appropriate. One of them emitted a soft error tone that suspiciously resembled embarrassment. Kale straightened. So do I win this part or, you are not supposed to survive this segment, Lysera said. Ah, Kale replied, that explains the aggressive furniture. The arena recalibrated itself reluctantly, like a system forced to accept that a user had clicked ignore warnings. A new pathway formed beneath them, spiraling upward through shifting geometry toward the next phase of the trial. Lysera stepped forward first. The frozen moment broke fully, and motion returned in a wave of rebalanced physics. She glanced at Kale briefly. You are statistically anomalous, she said. I get that a lot, he replied, mostly from machines and disappointed relatives. Her ears tilted slightly. And yet you persist. Habit, he said. Also, I already started this thing. Quitting feels like wasted effort, and I hate wasting effort more than I hate dying. Marginally, that is illogical. Welcome to engineering. They moved forward together, though not together in any meaningful emotional sense, more like two systems temporarily occupying the same malfunctioning pathway of reality. Behind them, the drones reset, the arena sighed in quantum relief, and somewhere deep in the Imperial network, a new flag was raised. Unknown outcome type, humor-driven system failure. Lysera heard it through her ear interfaces and said nothing, but her gaze lingered on Kale for a fraction longer than protocol required. and in a universe where every fraction of attention was measured, recorded, and optimized, that was already becoming a problem. The final chamber of the trial was quieter than the previous ones, which in Virelian engineering always meant it was significantly more dangerous. Silence was not absence of threat, it was threat that had learned manners. Kale noticed this immediately. So, he said, stepping onto the floating platform that was now suspended over a slow spiral of luminous data currents, this is the part where reality tries to explain itself at me, right? Lysera stood beside him again as she had through each stage, though something subtle had shifted in her posture. Not weakness, Virelian princesses did not do weakness, but recalibration. Her long ears caught streams of imperial telemetry, but the rhythm had changed. Less certainty, more questions that had not been properly categorized. This is the Judgment Core, she said. It evaluates the outcome of the trial and assigns ownership of the vow. Kale frowned, still not loving the word ownership. It is ceremonial. Yeah, so is feeding pigeons, but I don't want to belong to one. A faint flicker of amusement crossed her expression before she corrected it into composure. You are still functioning. Barely, he said. I think I've survived on confusion and bad decisions at this point. The core beneath them rotated slowly, revealing structures of impossible geometry, memory lattices, legal constructs encoded as physics, and ancestral rulings embedded in quantum recursion loops. Every layer of it pulsed with the accumulated authority of an empire that had been arguing with itself for several thousand years, and had decided the best solution was to make reality enforce verdicts. A voice emerged, not spoken but assembled from consensus. Final evaluation commencing. Claimant L. Usura VIRLLIO. Challenger KAEL Unit Human. Resolution will determine vow binding. Kale raised a hand. Quick question. If I lose, do I get a consolation prize or is it just emotional disintegration? No consolation prize, Lysera said. That tracks. The core began its analysis. Light folded inward. The arena reconstructed every moment of the trial, replaying Kale's path through gravitational collapse, drone negotiations, and unauthorized lever pulling with the cold precision of systems that deeply disapproved of improvisation. One segment paused, the maintenance hatch, the lever, the system hesitated. Kale leaned slightly toward Lysera. I feel like that lever is going to come up in therapy someday. It should not have existed, she said. Bold of you to assume I wouldn't find it anyway. The Judgment Core processed further, data streams tangled, probability branches collapsed and reformed, then something unexpected happened. It laughed, not literally. The Empire had not designed laughter into its judicial systems, but a distortion occurred in the consensus logic, a ripple of incoherence that resembled amusement in the way a supernova resembles a spark. Analysis error, the core declared. Challenger behavior does not align with win-loss parameters. Kale blinked. Is that good or bad? Lysera did not answer immediately. Her long ears shifted sharply as she accessed deeper layers of imperial law, layers that were rarely used because they tended to argue back. Then she said something that surprised even herself. It means the system cannot classify you. Kale nodded slowly. That sounds like a bureaucratic compliment. The core continued, more uncertain now. Traditional outcome, transfer of vow ownership invalid. Reason, vow ASSUMES control paradigm. Subject KAEL unit human exhibits an uncontrollable behavior pattern. Kale lifted a finger. I feel like I should be offended, but honestly that's just Tuesday. Lysera turned toward him fully now. For the first time since the trial began, she did not look like she was observing an outcome. She looked like she was inside one. You were not supposed to win, she said quietly. Yeah, Kale replied. I gathered that from the multiple death mazes. You disrupted an imperial binding vow. That was not on purpose. I was mostly trying not to fall into geometry. The core began to destabilize. Recommendation. Rerun trial with corrected variables. Kale sighed. Oh no, I've been turned into a software patch. Lysera raised a hand. The core paused. Her voice carried authority, but it was no longer purely ceremonial. Something else had entered it. Not rebellion, not defiance. Something more dangerous in Virelian terms, reconsideration. No, she said. The core hesitated. Princess Directive conflicts with traditional outcome protocol. I am Lysera of Virelian, she said, her ears catching a cascade of ancestral authority signals, and I revoke enforcement of ownership classification. The chamber went silent in a way that felt heavier than gravity. Kale looked at her. Is that allowed? It is now, she said. The core attempted to object. It failed. Because for the first time in recorded imperial history, someone inside the vow structure had chosen uncertainty over control, and the system had no protocol for voluntary contradiction from within its highest authority node. The entire structure stuttered, then stabilized, then recompiled itself with a new conclusion. Outcome updated, the core said. Vow is NON transferable. Kale exhaled, so I'm not property, great. That was a stressful sentence to exist inside. Lysera turned slightly away as if recalibrating her understanding of the universe. Her long ears lowered a fraction, not in shame, but in processing overload. You were correct, she said finally. About which part? Kale asked. Everything you said was inefficient. That is the nicest insult I've ever gotten. The core continued. Vow restructured as mutual observation agreement.